One of the parts of growth mindset is that we have to get students to believe it's possible. But a second part of growth mindset, especially if we want to see these permanent effects, is we have to find ways to support them in those decisions.
Welcome to Schools In, your go-to podcast for cutting-edge insights in learning. From early education to lifelong development, we dive into trends, innovations, and challenges facing learners of all ages. I'm Denise Pope, Senior Lecturer at Stanford's Graduate School of Education and co-founder of Challenge Success.
And I'm Dan Schwartz. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School of Education and the Faculty Director of the Stanford Accelerator for Learning.
Together, we bring you expert perspectives and conversations to help you stay curious, inspired, and informed. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Forever Learn Pope.
Forever learn.
Well, yes, because today we're talking about making lifelong learners. And so this is something that people have aspired to for a very long time. You know, back in the day, students used to take Latin because people believed it made like a more muscular brain. So, you take Latin, you're just more disciplined thinker. What do you think?
I don't know if I would want to subject students to Latin again, but I am very all in on lifelong learning. In fact, I love Dewey.
Yes, you do.
And John Dewey has this quote that I say almost all the time, which is, he says, the most important attitude to be formed is the desire to go on learning. If we don't have people who want to continue to learn, I'm not sure that society is going to survive because we're constantly having to learn new things. The world is not static, and so our learning should not be either.
So Dewey said a lot of things. Is there any empirical evidence that he's right about that?
This is maybe what our guest is going to talk about today, is maybe there's some evidence there. I know that if you're not a learner, you're not going to be able to adapt to the changes in the workplace, in the world, right?
Well, fortunately, we have like the nicest guy alive, Professor Eric Bettinger, who's an economist of education, and he's going to talk to us. He's also the Conley DeAngelis Family Professor in the Stanford Graduate School of Education, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, director of the Center of Educational Policy Analysis, director of the Lehman Center for Brazilian Education at Stanford, and a once upon a time football player.
Eric, you must never sleep. Oh my gosh.
Thank you for having me.
We're so lucky to have you here. So let's dive in, Eric. You have been looking at how to move folks towards becoming lifelong learners. Tell us why you think that's important, and also tell us a little bit about the studies, if you don't mind.
As you think about the need, especially in this kind of dynamic economy we're in, where we're learning new things, we have new things appearing, if we do not have the capacity to adapt and to start and to introduce and to engage in new technologies, it's going to be very difficult for us to continue to have the kind of progress we've had in the past. So that's the big picture. These two studies that we're going to talk about today really kind of focus on Norway and a little bit in the United States, trying to understand whether or not you can actually teach this kind of adaptability to students, and when's the right time to do it, and whether or not you can generate kind of long-run differences in the outcomes for them as a result of it.
Love it. So how do you go about trying to study the teaching of adaptability in students?
Well, so my expertise in education is really trying to think about how do we identify causal answers to questions. So I do a lot of randomized controlled trials. And in these particular studies we're talking about, we did some randomized controlled trials in Norway where we taught and introduced a curriculum to some students that really focused on the development of what we call a growth mindset. And with other students, we allowed them to kind of continue as normal. We taught them something about the brain, but we didn't really frame it around growth mindset.
What is growth mindset? Like, does it mean I'm going to get taller? Or
So growth mindset, Carol Dweck is the one who kind of posited what growth mindset is. It's that belief that our abilities can be developed with effort, with strategies, with feedback. It's our willingness to take on challenges to have those learning opportunities that we have.
And that's got to be related to lifelong learning. If you don't believe that you can learn something and something new hits you, then you need to have this growth mindset. Is that the the thought pattern there, Eric?
I think part of it is the alternative is a fixed mindset that you really can't get better. And that becomes an impediment to people trying to grow.
I think both of you are exactly right. It's both, if we don't have a growth mindset, the opposite is we're not learning and we're not willing to learn. And as we start to think about what it takes to be a successful adult, uh, it requires adaptability and learning.
Okay, so now how do you measure something like that? That seems hard to measure.
And this is kind of an interesting one because the social psychologists are really the group who have developed a growth mindset and the science around it. And they've done a wonderful job. And one of the things that happened was economists were trying to replicate this and people were struggling to do so. And one of the things is we've gone to the social psychologists and said, teach us how to do this. And it's amazing that some of the training that Carol Dweck and her colleagues, especially David Yeager, have put together, really focused on both helping students to understand the metaphor that the brain is like a muscle that needs some exercise. And then, secondly, to help them understand who are some of the people in our society who've demonstrated that type of growth mindset and what difference has it made for them.
So the idea is we give the kids a metaphor for how the brain can grow. The neurons reach and touch each other, which has got to be helpful compared to like saying, no, you can get smarter, which is really abstract. And I have no idea how that could take place. So I say, no, your brain, the neurons stretch as you try harder. And then you get examples of people who that you respect and have a growth mindset, and they expose it. So they become a powerful model for you to further believe in the idea that you can do better. Did I get it, Eric?
I think that's essentially it. I would also say that it's also just helping them understand a little bit about their identity and reshaping their identity around things that aren't fixed in their life. Like as my kids were growing up, I had one daughter who struggled a little bit in math. And it wasn't that she was bad at math, it was that she really had convinced herself that she wasn't a math person. And that was the line that she would give me all the time.
Denise, are you listening to this?
I am listening.
You are a math person. You
that
can
was sort
become
of
a math
me.
person, Denise.
It was sort of me growing up, Eric. And yes, I had to adopt a growth mindset around math, which is often tested in this podcast.
So, Eric, you're in Norway and you take half the kids and you put them into a class where they get like 3 hours of someone explaining they can grow, and then the other half are just in a standard classroom without the treatment. Is that how it went?
The way that when you do these types of things, we find that the more personalized experience they have, and for some of the statistical reasons, you even want to make the variation happen within the classroom. So we actually designed this curriculum where students would basically put on a headphone and they would sit in their classroom and they would watch a video, about an hour-long video that would describe it. And 2 weeks later, we'd come back and show another video. But in that context of that video, the students were having a very personalized experience. Now, what happened in the classroom was all of them saw the same graphics, but some of them were getting an explanation of the plasticity of the brain, and the others were actually getting the metaphor that growth mindset and the muscle is something that needs exercise. And for me, when I was reading the kind of social psychology literature, most of the evidence on growth mindset is based on those kind of immediately after. I'm much more interested in what happens a month later, 2 months later, a year later, and so forth. And that's really the focus of the studies, is to try to see how can we actually change that condition later in the process and not just at that moment.
This is great, Eric. There are studies that look at long-term effects, but a lot of them maybe not as precise as what you did.
Well, so here's the unique place that we learned, and here's kind of the unique contribution that I think this study gives. We did the growth mindset during essentially this time that the students have to make a decision within the Norwegian context as to what they're going to do over the next couple of years. Are they going to attend an academic school that would prepare them for a university, or are they going to attend some type of vocational school? And what type of math courses are they going to take once they get there? Are they going to go on a route where they take the kind of lowest possible math offerings that are available? In Norway, that would be kind of a year of practical math and maybe a second year of practical math, and no need to take math in the third year. Or do they try something that's much more difficult, where they're really thinking about the most advanced math that they possibly can? And one of the things that was unique about our study was because of the timing of when we did this, we got to see how this influenced their likelihood of actually taking a real risk, a real determination to follow over the next year or years a different track.
Yeah, this is really clever. How far after the intervention was the decision point for the kids to decide where they wanted to go?
So we put it right in the middle of the decision, and I think one unfortunate part was at least a third of our sample had to make a decision before we actually did the intervention, but the other two-thirds were making decisions in the process of it and had to make those decisions going forward. And what we saw is even though we didn't affect which school they went to, we did affect what classes they took. And we saw that it wasn't just right after the moment. It was that they had committed that the next year they were going to take a more challenging math class. And now we followed them for a good 3 years after it. And it's not just that they started on those tracks and then gave up, they kept on doing it. And so that's the most impressive piece is 3 years after this, 2-hour intervention across 3 weeks, we were basically able to influence the choice architecture that led to subsequently a much more difficult, a much more academic route, a route that really prepared students in many ways for more advanced training subsequently.
No, that's really exciting. So there's a lot of different bets on what you should do to help students, into the future. So a number of people focus on belonging. You should help them feel like they belong in the current situation, maybe the future situation. Me, I'm more of a knowledge guy, like give them the knowledge that helps them actually be able to adapt. And so it's sort of useful to know how big is the effect.
The easiest way to think about this, when you look at the kind of the probability that you took this advanced course, it really is modest in terms of what its meaning is. But one of the things that happens in the Norwegian context is when you apply to college, you get points, a little bit like we do in the United States with AP. You get extra points if you've taken these more difficult math classes. So, what we're talking about here is enough bonus points that it really enables you to go from a moderately selective college to one of the more selective colleges in the country. And going from potentially choosing a major that is somewhat difficult to get in and making it to where it's really attainable to a student, particularly a student who hadn't actually had that kind of background or training in their family and in their schools to have that growth mindset.
Okay, wait, because it sounds amazing, right? It sounds like you have changed the trajectory of a kid's life with a 2-hour intervention. I mean, that's like everybody would want that, right? I'm going to be a little bit more skeptical. I think the 2-hour intervention may lead them to do something in the immediate realm, but it's got to be something about the taking of the challenging class that then motivates them to continue to take the challenging classes, right?
This is the hard part. And I think this is the place where, we start thinking about this kind of second component that haven't come up in our discussion. I mean, one of the parts of growth mindset is that really we have to get students to believe it's possible. But a second part of growth mindset, especially if we want to see these permanent effects, is we have to find ways to support them in those decisions. And so as you start to think about both the supportive environments and so forth, how do we do that? And so take, for example, the math instructors. As you start to think about the types of teachers who teach more advanced classes, the types of teachers who engage in those, if those teachers are instilling and reinforcing growth mindset, and if the peers that students have are reinforcing growth mindset, then you have these kind of reinforcing mechanisms that are driving students over time. So yes, a 2-hour training starts the ball rolling, but as it starts rolling, you have a number of mechanisms around the students that can support them as they start to look for that kind of change.
Okay, so Eric, I have a question. If you think about teaching kids that the mind is a muscle, is that the answer, that we teach kids your mind is a muscle? Is that what you saw won out every time over the other conditions in the study? Help us understand that.
Sure. It's certainly in what we did, the mind as a muscle was the kind of metaphor that really resonated with students. But as you start to think about what does it take to really move it forward, it just can't be that flat message. It has to be something that becomes dynamic, that we start to scaffold. As an example, if you think about when we take on challenges, one of the things that we hope students have is a satisfaction that comes, that kind of internal joy that they might have from accomplishing something. And what we'd love is for intrinsic motivation and for other things to start to reinforce that teaching that we have, that taking challenges really can help students on the other side to have those eureka moments, those moments of, wow, I did it, those moments of accomplishment that can then reinforce their desire to continue to take on new challenges.
I just want to point out the Dewey nerd in me is that you are talking about educational experiences a la Dewey, right? It's that excitement that you get when you do something that makes you want to try again in another way. It was a pleasant experience and you learned something. And so you have the desire to go on learning.
Or we can have the control condition where I give them frequent flyer miles every time they try something hard. And I never tell them about a growth mindset.
The Maslow approach to,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Just reward them for trying hard.
Eric?
So going to this kind of comment, I mean, I think that one of the differences is in that literature that thinks about maybe we can, give them some type of extrinsic motivation to help them, as opposed to developing and strengthening intrinsic motivation. I mean, one of the biggest factors we find is that students feel sometimes when they're in a classroom that it's a competitive zero-sum game, that if somebody else succeeds, that they fail. And part of what we want to try to think about, going back to that theme of a supportive environment, is the great thing about growth mindset is everybody gains. Everybody can get it. And if you get it, it doesn't affect the likelihood that I get it. And so as a result, the intrinsic motivators of being on top, fall to the side, because with that intrinsic motivation that I can do better than I did yesterday and that I can be the best that I can be really start to drive things, or at least that's our hope.
I love you so much, Eric. Dan and I talk about this on the show all the time. So, yay.
So this is how track athletes talk about it. You ask them, did you win? And that's never, the response is, I did better than my last time.
Yes.
Right. That's what they're focusing on. It's very interesting. So Denise, I know you're dying to ask about AI. Right. It's all AI all the time. I know you want to ask. Do it.
Okay. I see ramifications here, very important ramifications from your studies, Eric. When you look at AI, the problem I have with AI is it's an easy button. And if the kids are not motivated, if they think it's busy work, if they're overloaded, if they're not into it, why not have this computer who can do the work for you just do it? Why not push the easy button? And I'm wondering if there's some sense of, if you have a growth mindset, maybe you don't do this, or I don't know. Talk to me about how we're going to help people not push the easy button in schools.
A couple of things that I would suggest. One, just starting to think about a framework. If you think about two descriptors of tasks that we have to do at school or in work or wherever it might be, one is whether or not it's a routine activity, and the other one, what the kind of cognitive load that's needed when we engage in that activity. And if you think about AI and what AI is going to do to our economy and some of the places, when it is a routine task that requires very little cognitive load, those are precisely the types of tasks that AI is going to replace. So I would put there that we can substitute AI for human effort. But if we really want to capture the benefits and the potential of AI, then as you start to think about that other kind of part of it, the non-routine and highly cognitive tasks, in those cases, we need AI to be a complement. It can accelerate and expand learning beyond what we might have. So going to this question, what are the types of tasks? What are the types of challenges that we give students? Do we give them routine, non-cognitive tasks that eventually AI is going to take over? Or do we push them a little harder to take things that aren't routine and things that aren't cognitive and really have them use AI to even accelerate and expand their decision-making powers? And for me, that's that second quadrant where you start to think of AI as a tool to help you do better. That's precisely that growth mindset where it comes in.
Yeah, I think Denise is thinking that the computer is going to say to you, you can grow, you can do it, try this.
I mean, right now it says you're the greatest thing ever and great question and well done. It's just it praises you all the time. I don't know that that's like you can do it.
Or it could give me points for whenever I try hard.
It could give you points, Dan.
Yeah.
You go keep going back to extrinsic.
Denise, can I ask something that's on a different line here? This is about
I give you my permission.
Thank you. So I hear lifelong learner or a nation of learners. Eric, I like that a lot. And the challenge is the workplace or out of school is very different than school. School has very defined structure, tests, things like that, teachers to help you. You go in the workplace, it's really different, right? And so the skills I learn in school may not actually transfer to make me a learner, or the attitudes in school may not work in this new context. So it's not guaranteed that the kid who's a good learner at school is a good learner on the job. So here's the question. What kind of measure could we put in the workplace to find out if people really have become, say, lifelong learners or adaptive learners? Like how would you measure this when they're on the job? And everybody's got different jobs, so it makes it tough.
I think this is a tremendously difficult question. But I think that part of where the research is going with this is starting to measure the content of a job and to understand the proficiencies that an individual has to happen. So instead of thinking about, the job of a professor, to try to think about it in its component parts. What are the specific parts we have? The teaching responsibilities, the counseling and mentoring students, whatever it might be, there are different tasks that are required of any given job. And as we start to think about those tasks, if we can understand and start to develop a metric of the likelihood that individuals become proficient or improve their proficiency in those particular tasks, the better it is for us in terms of our ability to measure whether mindset's translating into something on the job force.
So I'd need to come up with sort of very specific measures for each workplace setting to sort of see if there's growth over time in their skills and abilities.
Could it be each component skill?
Yeah, but they'd be domain specific. So like the skills of a dean are a different list of skills than the skills of a podcast host, right? And so you'd have to enumerate them. And then the alternative is you just see, do people who do well on assessments of growth mindset in 12th grade get promoted faster in the job? It'd be a proxy kind of
I
measure.
have another alternative.
Yeah.
You set up the problem that schools are not like the skills that you need to do well in school are not necessarily the skills you need to do well in the workplace. Change the schools.
Change the workplace.
Change both. At this point,
Let's blow up the whole system.
The other direction that we could also take this is also trying to think even outside of the schools. One of the things we've talked about throughout this is what are the supports around individuals? And people interact more with their families and with some of their community, their religion, or other things, oftentimes more so than they might, this 2-hour curriculum. And I think one of the things that I would love to see more research on is trying to understand how do parents install and how do we help parents in their parenting to really help students from an early age, help children at an early age to develop that kind of opportunity and the eagerness and the ability to learn.
Oh, I like that. So if I give you a growth mind at home, does it transfer into school? Closer to the question of will it go to the workplace, I guess I could measure kids' growth mindset in school and see, do they bring it home or do they bring it to if they have a summer job? It'd be easier to measure that.
Or other interests in the thing is when you're naturally interested in something, you have that, right?
I think if you're interested in something, it's irrelevant. You're not thinking about, do I grow or not? You're just interested in the thing, so you spend time on it.
Right. So, hello, is that not the answer that we're talking about here? Get people interested in what they're doing at school, at home, and at work. What do you think, Eric?
So we can go two directions on this. First, let me tell you a story that it really put in my mind that we need to understand what is growth mindset a little bit better than we do. I went to, my daughter was running for student body office at sixth grade. And I went in to listen to the speeches, and every speech ended, and I have a growth mindset. You should elect me because I have a growth mindset. And, I actually talked to Carol Dweck a little bit about this, and there was a worry that any pro-social behavior was being interpreted as a growth mindset. And, growth mindset is about that capacity and adaptability and that the desire to learn more and to take on challenges, but resilience, teamwork. We could come up with a laundry list of other types of pro-social behaviors that can really improve productivity in the market. In our case, if we wanted to really see how it was transpiring, the first one is we wish we had data on the higher education records, what schools they went to, what majors they had, to see if they were taking on majors and actually taking on and attending schools that were more challenging than what we would have projected based on, kind of the beginning of the intervention. And then if I were to take this into the labor force, trying to think a little bit more carefully about, as they take on those jobs, how are they learning and growing on that job in some meaningful way? I almost wish you could do a study of doctors and try to identify how doctors learn new tasks and learn new opportunities, learn new treatments, and whether or not somehow that's related to their capacity to adapt and to learn.
That's a nice target. They have a lot of incentives and structures to help them stay up to date. It'd be an interesting place to do it, to see.
Curious about some takeaways here, right? I'm a parent listening to this. I'm a teacher listening to this. Eric, based on your studies, what are some of the pieces of advice you might offer to those two different folks?
I think for parents, believe that your child can learn and teach them as such. When my daughter shared with me many years ago that she was not a math person, trying to help her develop confidence and to develop the resilience and to help her develop a growth mindset, to see that she had the capacity to learn, that was one of the most fulfilling things I had as a parent. As you think about teachers, trying to understand how to not only teach the principle in the way that we provide feedback, in the way that we support, but how to embed it in the way we talk to students, in the way we give assignments, in the way we give challenges, to both encourage and strengthen their capacity to do so.
Dan?
I agree with Eric. It's one thing to help them believe they can grow. It's another for them to experience it, because I think just telling them will get growth in if they keep getting stuck. You want to give them opportunities to succeed at difficult things. You want to give tasks where the student can make progress and see where they've grown in things, as opposed to a strong signal that you didn't get it right. So you let them know they can grow, and then you put them in an environment where you're going to not like this. You reinforce their success rate. There's a reason to believe. Well, that's points, Denise. It's
Well,
points.
no, there's other ways to reinforce success rates, Dan.
Frequent flyer points. That's all that works.
No, but okay, I happen to agree with both of you, right? As I think about this, you do need a little impetus, a little push. Maybe that's the 2-hour intervention. Maybe that's the mind is a muscle. Hey, there's no such thing as not a math person, right? We can all learn. So that's the starting point. But then, to your point, Dan, you have to get them to experience the actual pleasure of growing. And if you make the task too easy or too hard or whatever, they're not going to experience it. Or if they don't feel like they belong and they're not supported, they're not going to experience it. So I think we hit on a lot of really important things. Eric, thank you so much for being here. And thank all of you listeners for joining this episode of Schools In. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you tune in. I'm Denise Pope.
And I'm Dan, always growing Schwartz.